They tried to set her up as a joke on a blind date. But everyone was shocked when the single dad, a millionaire CEO, ended up proposing. Jenna Harper, 26, pulled at her cardigan sleeves nervously as she stepped off the bus. The stone sidewalk outside Rosewood Bistro glowed under the golden lights of the fancy restaurant. Part of her wanted to turn back. She clutched her phone, rereading the message from her friend Clara. "Just go in, Jen. He's already there. I promise it's not as bad as it sounds." 2 years ago, Jenna still believed in love the kind you read about in books. But that hope was crushed when her boyfriend of 3 years stole her savings money she had set aside for her sick mother to fund a startup. Then he left her. Worse, he left the city with her best friend. Since then, Jenna had built walls around her life. Mornings filled with work, evenings at the hospital with her mother, grocery runs, and reading quietly at her side. Love, she decided, was something she couldn't afford anymore. So when Vanessa, the loud, smug co-worker who loved to tease her, insisted that a man wanted to meet Jenna, she knew something wasn't right. Vanessa smirked and said, "He's into quiet girls. Single dad, older, harmless. Actually begged me for your number." The giggles and sideways glances that followed told Jenna all she needed to know. It wasn't kindness. It was a setup. Jenna refused at first. Blind dates weren't her thing, especially not ones arranged by someone who clearly disliked her. But later, Clara, her only real friend at work, pulled her aside, looking worried. She confessed, "They're making a joke of it. They booked you a table at Rosewood. Vanessa plans to be there. I tried to stop it, but she made it look like I set you up, so it's a prank." Jenna asked, her throat tight. Clara looked down. "I think so. But maybe the guy doesn't know. Or maybe he does. I'm sorry, Jen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Out of pride and quiet anger, Jenna decided to go anyway. She told herself she'd show up, hold her head high, and walk away. Clara walked with her to the restaurant, but stopped at the door, too ashamed to go inside. Now Jenna stood at the entrance, took a deep breath, and walked in. The hostess led her through rows of softly lit tables until they reached the corner. There she saw him, a man already waiting at the table Vanessa had chosen. But he wasn't alone. Beside him, in a small booster seat, sat a little girl, maybe 4 years old, with a head full of brown curls and a plush bunny clutched tightly in her arms. Jenna froze. That's when she heard it, the snickering. 2 tables away, Vanessa sat with 3 co-workers, pretending to sip their drinks while sneaking looks at their phones. One of them even had their camera pointed in Jenna's direction. "Oh my God," one of them whispered just loud enough for Jenna to hear. "He actually brought his kid. This is unreal. Who brings a toddler to a blind date?" Another laughed. Cringe level, maximum. Jenna's face went hot. Her heart pounded so hard it echoed in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to leave. But then the little girl looked up from her bunny and smiled. A smile so open, so pure, it cut through Jenna's embarrassment like sunlight. The man stood when he saw her, pulling out the chair across from him. His eyes were kind, deep set, a little tired, but kind. His shirt was plain, his hair slightly messy. Nothing like the creepy older guy image Vanessa had painted. "Hi," he said gently. "You must be Jenna. I'm Brian. And this," he nodded, toward the child, "is Sophie." Jenna looked at Sophie, who gave her a tiny wave, then back at Brian. Behind her, the snickering buzzed like static. Still, she walked forward and sat down. That one simple act, the choice to stay, seemed to throw the other table off. Their laughter softened. Jenna smoothed her skirt and tried to steady her breathing. She didn't dare glance back, but she could feel their stares and hear Vanessa's mocking voice. I mean, really. She's actually sitting there with that guy and his kid. Jenna clenched her hands under the table and forced herself to ignore it. Across from her, Brian adjusted Sophie's little sweater as the girl munched quietly on a breadstick, humming her own tune. Then he looked up and met Jenna's eyes, offering a calm, almost apologetic smile. Again. I'm really sorry about this, he said softly. I know this probably isn't what you were expecting. My babysitter cancelled at the last minute. I almost called to cancel too, but... He paused, uncertain, then added, I really didn't want to miss meeting you. Jenna blinked, caught off guard. There was no arrogance in his tone, no excuses, just sincerity. It's okay, she said, her voice softer than she meant. And even though the setup was humiliating and the whispers behind her unbearable, something about Brian's presence calmed her. He was tall, yes, but not intimidating, just steady. Brian's face carried a quiet weariness. There were laugh lines around his eyes, and a faint scar near his temple, like a man who had lived 1,000 lives before sitting here tonight. He wore a simple, dark button-down shirt and jeans. Nothing flashy. Everything about him felt real, steady, grounded. And then there was Sophie. The little girl sat still for a moment before reaching into her tiny backpack. She pulled out a notepad and a purple crayon, glanced shyly at Jenna, and began drawing with intense focus. She loves to draw, Brian said, leaning slightly closer. Mostly princesses and dinosaurs. Sometimes both. Jenna smiled in spite of herself. That's a unique combination. She has range, Brian chuckled. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Jenna found her shoulders lowering bit by bit. The soft golden lighting of the restaurant wrapped the table in warmth. Around them, forks clinked and conversations hummed. But her focus stayed on Brian, the way he kept glancing at Sophie, gentle, attentive, always present. Finally, Sophie lifted her drawing with a wide grin. Look, she chirped, waving it toward Jenna. Jenna took the picture carefully with both hands. It was a crayon sketch of a blonde woman in a long purple gown, sparkles across the dress, and a golden crown on her head. Is this me? Jenna asked, surprised. Yes, Sophie nodded seriously. You look like a princess. Jenna's throat tightened unexpectedly. She doesn't say that often, Brian added, his eyes soft as he watched his daughter. Her usual favorite is a triceratops named Rosie. Jenna laughed quietly, touched. I'm honored. She was about to say more when she caught movement from the corner of her eye. One of the women from Vanessa's table had stood and was heading toward them, pretending it was a casual stroll. Oh, hey, the woman said with mock surprise. Didn't know you were into this kind of thing. Jenna's smile faltered. The woman's gaze shifted to Sophie, then back to Jenna. I mean, you must know you're the type who ends up on dates with single dads, right? Kind of perfect, actually. Jenna froze. Before she could answer, Brian stood up slowly. Calm, but firm. He rested one hand gently on Sophie's shoulder and met the woman's eyes. I'm proud to be a father, he said evenly. And I respect the woman across from me more than anyone at that table seems capable of. The woman's smirk faltered. She blinked, scoffed, then turned away. Brian sat back down and looked at Jenna again. Sorry about that. Jenna didn't speak right away. She just looked at him, really looked, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't a joke. Not to him. Not to Sophie, and maybe not to her anymore. Either. Jenna folded Sophie's drawing carefully and slipped it into her purse, as if it was something precious. Dinner arrived soon after the interruption, and the tension in her chest slowly faded as the whispers from the nearby table quieted. Sophie, now busy arranging her French fries into what she proudly called a princess crown, was an adorable distraction, but Jenna found herself watching Brian. He wasn't trying to impress her with smooth lines or forced charm. There was something steady about him, quiet, sincere. He asked thoughtful questions about her day, her hobbies, even whether she preferred sunrises or sunsets. "No one's asked me that in a long time," Jenna admitted. Brian smiled. "Sometimes the little things tell you the most." She chose sunsets. They feel like a quiet goodbye at the end of a long day. He nodded, understanding more than her words said. Then he shared something unexpected. "My wife passed away 3 years ago," he said softly, cutting Sophie's food. "Ovarian cancer. It was fast. Diagnosed late." Jenna's heart sank. "I'm so sorry." He gave a gentle smile. "Thanks." Sophie was only 1 then. She remembers her through stories now. He paused. "I haven't dated since. Honestly, this is my first time trying again." There was no pity in his voice, only truth from someone still healing. Then, "We're both first-timers," Jenna said quietly. "At least, in a long time." She didn't explain more, but something in Brian's gaze told her he sensed there was pain behind her. Smiled too. After dinner, Brian suggested dessert. "They have great homemade ice cream," he said with a hopeful grin. Sophie's eyes lit up instantly. Soon, 3 bowls arrived: vanilla for Jenna and Sophie, dark chocolate for Brian. Sophie giggled between bites, declaring herself the ice cream princess and her sticky kingdom. Jenna joined in as the royal knight of sprinkles. Without hesitation, Brian became Sir Napkin, keeper of clean hands. Their laughter came easily. Jenna couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so light, so free. When the server brought the check, Jenna instinctively reached for her wallet. She knew how this had been arranged: an expensive restaurant, meant as a cruel joke. And Brian didn't look like someone wealthy. But as she opened her purse, Brian gently touched her hand. "Please," he said softly. "Let me." She hesitated, but he added, "I know what this place costs." "I said yes because I wanted to be here with you." There was no arrogance, just quiet certainty. He'd noticed her instinct to pay, not out of obligation, but sincerity. In that moment, something shifted between them. Respect, trust, a fragile thread pulling them closer. Outside, the night air was cool. Brian carried Sophie in one arm as they walked Jenna back to her building. Sophie blinked sleepily, her crown of fries long forgotten. At the corner, she stirred and reached toward Jenna, wrapping her small arms around her neck. "You made Daddy smile a lot tonight," she whispered. "He smiles more when you're here." Jenna hugged her back, her chest tightening. She glanced at Brian. His eyes were tired but warm, filled with quiet gratitude. They said their goodbyes softly, unspoken promises lingering between them. Jenna walked the last few blocks alone, Sophie's drawing still tucked in her purse like something sacred. When she reached her apartment, she leaned against the door and let the tears fall. Not from sadness, something else. Relief. Later that night, she picked up her phone and typed 2 simple words, "Thank you." Minutes later, his reply lit up her screen. "Thank you for not walking away when you saw me with my daughter, for the first time in what felt like years." Jenna fell asleep, smiling, in the days that followed. Jenna found herself smiling at her phone more than she had in years. What began with a simple thank you became a steady stream of texts, cheerful good mornings, silly photos of Sophie dressed up, thoughtful articles, and late-night confessions that felt like secrets shared in the dark. They didn't talk constantly, but when they did, it was different, real, like opening a window in a room that had been closed too long. On Saturday morning, Brian invited her to a children's art exhibition at the Maplewood Community Center. "Sophie's been working on something she wants to show you," he said, his voice hopeful. "She'll be devastated if you're not there." Jenna smiled at the message. "I'll be there," she replied without hesitation. The center, tucked between a library and a small garden, looked modest outside but was warm and welcoming within. Paper butterflies hung from the ceiling. Handprints lined the walls in every color. Near the entrance, a group of kids played off-key tunes on plastic instruments, filling the air with cheerful chaos. Brian greeted her with Sophie perched on his hip, dressed in a pink tutu and plastic tiara, clearly taking the day very seriously. "She's been talking about this all week," Brian said as he set her down. "Come on, let me show you." They led Jenna into the main room, where dozens of children's paintings were displayed on easels. Some were stick figures, others wild splashes of color, each one alive with innocence. Sophie tugged on Jenna's hand, her eyes shining. This one's mine." Jenna leaned in. The painting was simple but unmistakably heartfelt. A little girl in a purple dress holding hands with 2 adults. One was clearly Brian. The other, with blonde hair and a soft yellow dress, was undeniably meant to be Jenna. Across the top of Sophie's painting, written in big chunky red letters, were the words, "Mommy." Too. Jenna's throat tightened. She crouched down to Sophie's level. "Is that me?" she asked softly. Sophie nodded proudly. "You helped Daddy smile." "That's what mummies do." Brian looked down, his face unreadable for a moment. Then he turned slightly, pretending to fuss with the strap on Sophie's shoe. Jenna knew he was holding something back. They spent the next hour walking through the rest of the exhibit. Jenna noticed how everyone seemed to know Brian, not just as Sophie's dad, but as someone important. Teachers shook his hand. Parents thanked him quietly. Volunteers smiled at him with respect. Afterward, while Sophie joined a coloring circle, Jenna and Brian stood off to the side near a coffee table, sipping lukewarm tea from paper cups. "This place is really lovely," Jenna said. "It's been like a second home for Sophie." Brian replied, "She's lucky to have you," Jenna said without thinking. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a small shrug. "I just do what I can." Something in his tone stirred Jenna's curiosity. Pieces didn't quite fit. He always paid for meals, but never bragged. His apartment, from the one photo she had seen, was modern but understated. His clothes were simple but high quality. His words were humble, yet his calm confidence hinted at someone used to responsibility, someone used to being in charge. As they left the center, Sophie fell asleep in his arms. Brian's phone buzzed. He unlocked it quickly, and for a split second Jenna caught a glimpse of his screen. An email address flashed across the top one with the domain of a powerful investment firm she had seen on the news, one of the biggest in the country. The kind of address reserved for executives and board members. Brian noticed her glance. Their eyes met. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said gently. Jenna hesitated, then nodded. He didn't flinch. Didn't try to cover it up. "I try to keep that part of my life quiet," he said calmly. "People treat you differently once they know you're a CEO. Jenna said quietly. "Yes," he answered. "Technically, I'm the founder of the firm that funds this center." Among other things, Jenna looked back at the building, then at him. Speechless, Brian shifted Sophie slightly in his arms and looked at Jenna again, his voice soft, almost grateful. "You looked at me like I was just a dad trying to keep it together, and that's the most valuable thing anyone's done for me in years." That night, Jenna sat at her kitchen table, staring into a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The only sound in Jenna's apartment was the low hum of the refrigerator. Yet inside her mind, a storm raged out. Fear. Shame. The more time she spent with Brian and Sophie, the heavier the weight in her chest became. Brian was kind, steady, generous without ever boasting, and Sophie bright-eyed. Sweet Sophie had slipped past her defenses like sunlight through a cracked blind. But even as they grew closer, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. Brian was the founder of a major investment firm, a man who quietly funded community centers and moved in circles far beyond her reach. She was a junior accountant with no savings, a sick mother, and a past scarred by betrayal. He deserved someone polished, accomplished, not someone broken, discarded, and barely holding herself together. And Sophie deserved a woman who wouldn't flinch when she accidentally called her Mummy. So Jenna began to pull away. She answered Brian's texts later and later. She made excuses to skip dinners. She cancelled their Sunday plans without rescheduling. She told herself she was protecting them from her inevitable shortcomings. Then came the final blow. Vanessa had found out about Jenna and Brian, maybe through gossip, maybe from seeing them at the park. One morning, Jenna walked into the office and felt every stare follow her like shadows. When she checked her phone, she saw it. A picture of her crouched beside Sophie, tying the little girl's shoe. The caption read, "Some women will play house with anyone just to feel needed. Cringe." The comments were worse, laughing emojis, snide remarks, and a few fake hope you're okay messages from co-workers who had never spoken a kind word to her. That night, Jenna couldn't sleep. By morning, she had typed her resignation, printed it, and handed it in without a word. She told no one except Clara. Days later, Clara showed up at her apartment with takeout and fire in her eyes. Jenna tried to fake sleep on the couch, but Clara wasn't fooled. She dropped the food on the table. "You quit your job," Clara said sharply, "and you ghosted Brian. Are you seriously running away from the only good thing that's happened to you in years?" Jenna sat up slowly, her voice rough. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me," Clara snapped. Jenna's throat tightened. "He's everything I'm not. Generous, powerful, stable. I'm just someone he feels sorry for. And Sophie, if I let her love me, I'll just end up hurting her too." Clara stared at her like she'd grown another head. "He never once treated you like a pity project. He sees you, Jenna, you and Sophie. That little girl lights up the second you walk in the room." Jenna looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Clara's voice softened. But her words hit like truth, slicing through every wall Jenna had built. "You're not afraid of failing, Jenna," Clara had said. "You're afraid of being loved for real. No strings, no conditions. That terrifies you." Jenna hadn't answered. But when Clara left, she broke. For the first time in weeks, she cried, hard, unguarded, unable to stop. The next evening, a knock sounded at her door. When Jenna opened it, Brian stood there. Sophie rested against his shoulder, her pink bunny dangling from one hand. He didn't speak at first. His eyes searched hers, calm, steady. "I didn't come to argue," he said softly. "I just needed to see you. One last time. If that's all you'll let me have." Jenna's throat burned. She couldn't find words. Sophie squirmed down from his arms and stepped forward, holding out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," she said, placing it carefully into Jenna's hands. "It's our family. You're in it." With trembling fingers, Jenna unfolded the drawing. There they were, Sophie, Brian, and her drawn in bright crayon, holding hands beneath a rainbow arched clumsily overhead. The tears came, sudden and unstoppable. And for the first time, Jenna wasn't sure if she was falling apart or finally coming back. Together, the ballroom buzzed with chatter, perfume, and the low hum of hundreds of conversations. The Women Who Rise Conference was one of the city's most celebrated events, an annual gathering honoring stories of resilience, healing, and hope. Jenna hadn't planned to attend. Not this year. But Clara had insisted. "You need to be reminded of who you are," she'd said firmly, pressing the ticket into Jenna's hand. "And may be reminded of what you still deserve." So Jenna had come. She sat near the back, dressed simply, clutching a folded program she hadn't even opened. She tried to focus as speakers shared stories of addiction, loss, recovery, but her mind kept drifting. To Brian, to Sophie, to the almost love she had walked away from. The MC's voice cut through her thoughts. "And now, we're honored to introduce our final speaker of the day. A man whose quiet contributions have changed lives across this city. The founder of the Hope Sparks Foundation, Mr. Brian Morgan." Jenna's fingers went cold. Applause thundered around her. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Brian walked onto the stage, composed in a navy suit, the picture of calm confidence. But when his gaze swept across the crowd and landed on her, he paused, just for a heartbeat. Then he smiled. "Good afternoon," he began. His voice was steady, but Jenna heard the softness beneath it. Vulnerability she recognized. "I'll keep this brief," he continued, "because this conference isn't about me. It's about youth, the women who keep moving forward, even when the world tells you to stop." Jenna's heart pounded. "I started Hope Sparks after I lost my wife," Brian said. His voice carried through the hushed ballroom. "I needed a reason to keep showing up for my daughter, for myself. What I didn't expect was to find something that would spark again in me." He glanced down at his notes, then closed the folder. His next words came from the heart. And sometimes life surprises you in the most unexpected ways. Then, without warning, he stepped down from the stage. The ballroom stilled. Hundreds of women, Hundreds of eyes followed him as he walked past rows of seats straight toward the back of the room. Toward her, Jenna's breath caught. Her pulse thundered in her ears. When he reached her, Brian sank to one knee. Gasps rippled through the crowd in his hand. He held a small velvet box, not with a glittering diamond, but a simple gold band. Elegant, understated, meaningful. He looked up at her, eyes shining. "Jenna," he began, voice steady but low enough it felt like it was meant only for her. "The day they made a joke out of my daughter, you sat down anyway. You saw past the setup, past the whispers. You made a little girl feel seen. And you made me believe again." Tears blurred Jenna's vision. "You turned their cruelty into the kindest moment of my life. And since then, every moment with you has only proven what I already knew that night." He drew in a deep breath. "Jenna, would you be the first person to call me husband again since the day I lost everything?" The world seemed to stop. No cough, no whisper, no sound at all. Just his eyes, waiting. Jenna pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her whole body shook as she stood on unsteady legs, tears streaming down her cheeks. Words failed her, but her heart didn't. She nodded once, twice. It was enough. The ballroom erupted cheers, applause, cries of joy echoing off the chandeliers. Brian rose, slipping the ring gently onto her finger before wrapping her into his arms. Just then, a small figure came darting down the aisle. A pink tutu fluttered as Sophie launched herself forward, straight into Jenna's embrace. "Does this mean?" Sophie giggled through her own happy tears. "I have a mummy now." Jenna knelt, arms wrapped tightly around her. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered, voice breaking. "You do." Brian crouched beside them, one hand on Sophie's shoulder, the other on Jenna's back. And under the bright lights, in front of a crowd of strangers who were suddenly family too, the three of them held each other. Not as coincidences, not as what-ifs, but as something whole. The little house on Maple Lane was always filled with light. Not just from the wide windows or the afternoon sun spilling across wooden floors, but from laughter echoing down the hallway, from stories traded at the dinner table, from the quiet joy of three people learning how to belong to one another, a father, a daughter, and the woman who had turned a cruel joke into the start of a family. Jenna had moved. In just 2 weeks after the proposal, her belongings folded neatly into boxes, her heart still overwhelmed by how quickly life had shifted. But Brian made space for her, not just in his home, but in every part of his life, and Sophie's wide-eyed Sophie had already made space for her long before. Every morning, Jenna helped pack Sophie's lunch, slipping in small doodles or handwritten notes, just as Brian once told her his late wife used to do. And every night, after story time and kisses goodnight, Jenna would find herself tucked into Brian's arms, still marveling at how safe, how seen she could feel. But the most surprising part wasn't just the love, it was the purpose. With Brian's encouragement, Jenna took a leap she never imagined. Together, they launched a free art program for underprivileged children at the very same community center where Sophie's mummy to painting once hung. The program was simple: paint, draw, dream. A place for children who had seen too much, been through too much, and needed room to simply be. Brian didn't just fund it. He stepped back. "This is yours," he told her one morning, placing the full project folder in her hands. "You have the heart for it. The vision, I'm just the guy who signs the checks." But Jenna knew better. Behind every canvas and crayon was a man who believed in second chances, not just for himself, but for her, for Sophie, for every child who walked through those doors. Soon after, Brian gave her the title of project director. Quietly, without fanfare, he also updated the Hope Sparks documents, naming Jenna the new executive director. "Are you sure?" she whispered, stunned. "I trust you more than anyone," he said simply. "Besides, you've already changed lives, starting with mine." And so, in a corner of the world once marked by pain, Jenna found a kind of healing she never thought possible, through art, through children, through love. It wasn't grand gestures, but the steady rhythm of kindness, day by day, in every brushstroke, in every whispered thank you, and in every smile from Sophie. Jenna understood. This was what rebuilding looked like. The soft clinking of cutlery, the warm hum of conversation, and the familiar glow of low-hanging lights made Rosewood Bistro feel exactly the same. Yet for Jenna, everything had changed. She stepped through the door hand in hand with Brian, her golden hair curled gently over her shoulders. A year ago, she had walked into this place with dread, braced for humiliation. Now she walked in with love beside her and peace in her chest. Sophie had stayed home that evening with her grandmother, proudly declaring she was too grown up for boring restaurants, and insisting they go on a family picnic tomorrow instead. Brian leaned closer, brushing his thumb over her hand as they were led to their table, and as Jenna looked around at the candlelit room, where everything had begun, she realized this wasn't just the place where her story had turned. It was the place where she had learned the cruelest beginnings can lead to the most beautiful forever. The hostess looked up from her stand and smiled in recognition. "You're back," she said warmly. "Same table." Brian nodded, and she led them toward the back, toward the corner table by the window. The very table where a blind date and a cruel joke had once begun it all. Jenna sat down slowly, her gaze sweeping over the room. It felt like she was finally at peace with the memory. "Can't believe it's been a year," she murmured. Brian reached across the table, lacing his fingers through hers. "Feels like yesterday." They ordered simply. They laughed easily. They spoke softly. When the plates were cleared and the dessert menu politely declined, Jenna leaned in, her voice quieter. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "About how it all started?" Brian's eyes wandered around the room, then settled back on her. "Sometimes," he said, "but not the way you'd think." Jenna tilted her head. "Do you ever feel angry that they tried to make me the punchline of a joke? That they dragged Sophie into it?" His eyes softened. He squeezed her hand gently. "No," he said without hesitation. "Because if they hadn't, I wouldn't have found you." He smiled, then genuine, unguarded. "If it took a stupid, petty joke to lead me to the most sincere thing I've ever known, then I can't hate how it started." Jenna blinked against the sting of tears. He leaned closer, his voice low. "Sometimes the best things in life come wrapped in the worst disguises." She laughed quietly, brushing her thumb along his. "And sometimes," she whispered, "you find forever at a table meant for heartbreak." Brian kissed the back of her hand. "Happy anniversary, sweetheart," and under the same glow of lights, at the same table, what began as a setup meant to humiliate had become the most beautiful beginning of all. If this story touched your heart even just a little, if you believe that kindness can heal, and that love can grow from the most unexpected places, then don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories. We share powerful Emotional tales that remind us what truly matters. Stories like Jenna, Brian, and little Sophie, stories that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the last word. This is Soul Stirring Stories. We'll see you in the next one.